The price for her son's life was a single night. That was the thought that echoed in Aria Winter's mind, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against the lavish noise of the party. She stood in a shadowed alcove, her server's uniform feeling like a second, tighter skin, across the ballroom. Alpha Kieran Shadowmere, the man who had once owned her heart, laughed with his pack members, oblivious. He was beautiful, as always, his silver blonde hair catching the light of the crystal chandeliers, and beside him, his fiancée, Serafina Vale, watched Aria with eyes as cold and sharp as chips of ice. "Stop stalling." Serafina's voice was a low hiss beside her ear. She had cornered Aria near the kitchens, the scent of her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. "The medicine for your boy is already in my father's safe. You know the deal." Aria's hands trembled. Ethan, her sweet, 6-year-old son, his face, pale and feverish, was seared into her memory. The pack doctors had shaken their heads, muttering about a rare blood ailment, but Serafina had offered a solution, a dark, twisted miracle. "Alpha Vincent is in the West Wing suite," Serafina continued, pressing a small, ornate key into Aria's palm. The metal was cold. "He's the most powerful alpha here. Make him happy. Make him remember you. My father says he's been searching for a lost daughter for years. Who knows? Maybe a night of pleasure will make him generous." Aria flinched. The words felt like stones thrown at her. I can't." Serafina's smile was without warmth. "You can't afford not to, unless you want to watch your son fade away." She lifted a glass of deep red wine from a passing tray. "Here, for courage." Aria hesitated, but Serafina's gaze was unyielding, with a shaking hand. She took the glass and drank. The wine was heavy and sweet, but a strange, unfamiliar heat spread through her veins almost instantly, making her head feel light and fuzzy. It wasn't just wine. "Good girl," Serafina purred, her eyes glinting with a cruel triumph. "Now go. Don't disappoint me." As Aria stumbled away, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and the strange, drug-induced warmth, she didn't see Serafina give a subtle nod to Kieran. She didn't see Kieran approach his older brother, the formidable Alpha Dante Blackthorn, who was observing the party from the shadows. His presence a vortex of quiet, dangerous power. "Brother," Kieran said, his tone casual. "Alpha Vincent is feeling unwell. He asked to switch suites for the night. He'll take yours, and you can use the West Wing suite. It's quieter." Dante's dark eyes narrowed slightly, but he merely gave a curt nod. The politics of these gatherings bored him. A quiet room was all he wanted. Meanwhile, Aria fought the dizzying haze clouding her mind. Each step toward the West Wing felt like wading through water. Her son's face. She had to do this for Ethan. She clutched the key, her knuckles white. In his small room in the servants' quarters, Ethan tossed in his sleep, his breath shallow, a single. Whispered word escaped his lips, lost to the empty room. "Mother, the silver light, the throne." Aria reached the door to the West Wing suite. The number gleamed under the sconce light, taking a deep, shuddering breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart. She slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The room was dark, the only light a sliver of moonlight cutting through a gap in the heavy curtains. A figure stood by the window, a broad-shouldered silhouette against the night sky. He turned as she entered, and even in the gloom, she knew this was not the aging, venerable Alpha Vincent. This man was younger, harder, a predator. The air crackled with his power, a scent of pine and oncoming storm that overwhelmed her senses. He took a step toward her, and his voice was a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards, through the soles of her worn shoes, and straight into her bones. "Who are you?" The drug, the fear, and the sheer force of his presence crashed over her. Her legs gave way, and the world dissolved into darkness. Dante caught her before she hit the floor. Her body was a fragile weight in his arms, and the scent that rose from her skin was intoxicating, a dizzying mix of wildflowers, vanilla, and something else, something ancient and powerful that called directly to the beast within him. Mine, his wolf, obsidian, snarled in his mind. It was a possessive, primal roar he hadn't heard in years. He carried her to the bed, his movements fluid and controlled, but his mind was in chaos. Who was this woman? A servant, judging by her simple dress, but her scent, it was the scent of destiny. He laid her down gently, and as the moonlight touched her face, he saw the flush on her cheeks, the faint sheen of sweat on her brow. She was feverish, drugged. Rage, cold and sharp, coiled in his gut. Someone had done this to her. Someone had sent this lamb into what they thought was a lion's den. He was about to call for his doctor when her eyes fluttered open. They were wide and dazed, the color of a stormy sea. She looked at him, not with fear, but with a strange, hazy recognition, as if she were seeing him in a dream. "It's so warm," she whispered, her voice husky. The drug Serafina had given her was a potent aphrodisiac, designed to shatter inhibitions. It surged through Aria's system, mixing with the overwhelming power radiating from Dante. Her body, starved of any real warmth or comfort for years, reacted instinctively. She reached out, her small hand landing on his chest, right over his heart. A jolt, like lightning, shot through him, through her touch. An image flashed in his mind, a magnificent silver wolf standing on a cliff, a silver crown of light hovering above its head, a queen. He recoiled as if burned, but she whimpered at the loss of contact. "Please, don't go." He looked down at her, at the raw, unguarded need in her eyes, and something inside him broke. The iron control he prided himself on, the cold wall he had built around his heart. It all crumbled to dust. Obsidian was howling, clawing at the inside of his mind, demanding, "Claim her, protect her. She is ours." He lowered himself onto the bed beside her, telling himself it was just to keep her calm, but when she shifted closer, her body fitting against Oz as if it were made for that exact purpose, he knew he was lost. Her scent was everywhere, a sweet poison that bypassed all his defenses. "What have you done to me?" he murmured, his voice rough with a desire that stunned him. Aria didn't answer with words. Guided by an instinct she didn't understand, she arched her back slightly, a silent invitation. The movement caused the collar of her simple dress to slip, exposing the nape of her neck and the top of her shoulder blade. In the pale moonlight, Dante saw it, a birthmark in the shape of a perfect, delicate crescent moon. As he stared, transfixed, the mark seemed to pulse with a soft, silvery light, visible only for a second before fading. He thought he was imagining it, a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by her intoxicating scent. He leaned down, his lips hovering over the mark, and inhaled the scent of ancient magic, of moonlight and power, flooded his senses. All rational thought fled. There was only this woman, this moment, and the undeniable, earth-shattering feeling that he had finally, after a lifetime of searching, come home. Their coming together was not a battle, but a surrender. It was a fever dream of soft sighs and calloused hands, of tangled limbs and whispered names. For Aria, it was a release from a world of pain and fear, a moment of connection so profound it felt like her soul was finally recognized. For Dante, it was an awakening, the beast and the man finally in agreement. This was their mate, their Luna, their queen. He saw flashes behind his eyes as they moved together, visions of ancient forests, of star-filled skies, of a woman with silver hair and eyes like Aria's, leading a legion of wolves. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that this seemingly ordinary girl in his arms was anything but. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pale rose and gray. The haze of the drug began to lift from Aria's mind. Reality came crashing back in a brutal, horrifying wave. She was in a stranger's bed, a powerful, dangerous stranger. She had failed. She had betrayed her own self-respect, her memory of Ethan's father, everything. Panic seized her. She scrambled out of the bed, her movements clumsy, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled on her crumpled dress, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. Dante stirred, his red eyes opening slowly. They focused on her, and for a moment, they held a startling softness. "Wait," he said, his voice a low rumble. But Aria didn't wait. She couldn't. With a choked sob, she turned and fled, leaving behind a scent of wildflowers and a profound sense of loss that already felt like a phantom limb. The hallway felt miles long, every sound the distant clatter of plates from the kitchen. The murmur of early rising pack members seemed to mock her. Aria pushed through the doors leading out of the VIP wing, her steps frantic. She just had to get back to her room, back to Ethan. She would get the medicine from Serafina, and then she would never, ever think about this night again. But as she rounded a corner, she ran straight into a wall of people. Serafina stood at the center, a perfectly feigned look of shock on her face. Beside her stood Kieran, his expression unreadable, and behind them, a small crowd of young, influential pack members, all staring at Aria with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Well, Serafina's voice dripped with false sympathy. Look who finally decided to emerge. You must have had a very busy night. Aria's face burned with shame. She clutched the fabric of her dress, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look. Serafina, please. Please what? Aria Serafina's voice grew louder, drawing more attention. Did you enjoy yourself? Was Alpha Vincent to your liking? I suppose a desperate Omega would do anything for a taste of power. You're nothing but a common whore, trying to sleep your way to the top. The words were like slaps. The crowd began to whisper, their stares turning from curious to hostile. A wolfless Omega, someone muttered. Disgusting. Aria looked at Kieran, a desperate, silent plea in her eyes. Help me. Say something. They had grown up together. He had once whispered that he loved her, but he just stared back at her, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with something that looked chillingly like disgust. He remained silent, his silence a crushing verdict. Aria's world shattered. The hope she had clung to that some small part of him still cared evaporated. There was nothing left but shame and the cold, hard reality of her situation. She belongs to me. The voice cut through the whispers like a sword through silk. It was low, cold, and utterly commanding. The crowd parted like the sea as Alpha Dante Blackthorn emerged from the VIP hallway. He moved with a lethal grace, his dark clothes making him seem like a creature born of shadows. His crimson eyes were fixed not on the crowd, but on Aria. He came to a stop beside her, his presence a shield of pure, intimidating power. The air grew thick and heavy. Serafina faltered. Alpha Blackthorn. We were just... Dante ignored her completely. His gaze shifted to Kieran. Your Luna-to-be seems to have mistaken my suite for Alpha Vincent's. His voice was deceptively calm. And this servant, I believe you once told me that the staff of Silver Crest were gifts to your guests, to be used as they see fit. Is that not correct? Alpha Shadowmere. Kieran paled, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He had said something like that once, a boastful, arrogant comment meant to impress Dante. He never imagined it would be thrown back in his face like this. Yes, Alpha. Good, Dante said, the word a final, sharp crack. He looked down at Aria, whose head was bowed in humiliation, with a surprising gentleness. He placed a hand on her shoulder. A current of warmth spread from his touch, chasing away some of the chill in her bones. Then she is my property for the duration of my stay. and I do not appreciate other people gossiping about my property." The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Serafina's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. Dante's attention returned to Aria. "You have a son," he stated. "Not a question. He is sick." Aria's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. How did he know? "He will be moved to the Crimson Shadow Medical Facility immediately. My personal physician will attend to him." He looked past her, his eyes locking with one of his own guards. "Make it happen." The guard nodded and disappeared. Aria's mind reeled. Go with this terrifying Alpha, leave her pack, but then she thought of Ethan, of the inadequate care he was receiving here, a private physician, the best medical facility. It was a chance she couldn't refuse. She started, her voice barely a whisper. "You will come with me," Dante said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your son needs you, and you belong with me now." Obsidian, his wolf, was silent for once, not with anger, but with a deep, rumbling satisfaction. Protect her. She is important. Dante didn't understand it. He didn't understand why he was shielding this girl, why the thought of anyone else touching her or speaking ill of her sent a murderous rage through him, but he trusted his wolf's instincts above all else, and his instincts were screaming that this girl, Aria Winters, was the key to everything. He guided Aria through the silent, staring crowd, his hand a firm, possessive weight on her back. For Aria, it felt like she was walking out of one cage and straight into another, more gilded, but a cage all the same. But for her son, she would walk into the heart of any storm. The Crimson Shadow Medical Facility was less like a hospital and more like a high-tech research laboratory carved into the side of a mountain. It was sterile, quiet, and efficient. Aria sat on a plush chair in a private waiting room, twisting her hands in her lap. Ethan was in an examination room down the hall with a man Dante had introduced as Dr. Callum Rowe. The doctor was an older man with kind eyes that seemed to see far more than he let on. An hour passed, feeling like an eternity. Finally, the door opened and Dr. Callum entered, followed by Dante. The doctor's expression was grim, and Aria's heart plummeted. "Please, sit." "Ms. Winters," Dr. Callum said gently. Aria was already sitting, but she gripped the arms of her chair. "Is it bad? What's wrong with him?" Dr. Callum took a deep breath. "Ethan is suffering from a very rare condition we call alpha marrow deficiency syndrome, in layman's terms. His body is not producing viable wolf cells. His own immune system is dormant. It's why he's so susceptible to illness and why his wolf has never manifested." "What does that mean?" Aria asked, her voice trembling. "Can you fix it?" "It means," Dr. Callum said, his gaze careful, "that he needs a bone marrow transplant, but not just any marrow. It must come from an alpha of a pure, powerful bloodline. The genetic markers have to be almost perfect." Aria's hope withered. An alpha. A powerful one, they were the most arrogant, inaccessible people in their world. Who would ever agree to such a thing for the son of a wolf-less servant? Dante, who had been listening silently, his arms crossed over his chest, finally spoke. "Can you find a match?" Dr. Callum hesitated. He looked from Dante to Aria, and his eyes held a strange, almost awestruck expression. "That's the most astonishing part. Alpha. We ran a full genetic panel on Ethan." He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a complex web of genetic data, but one line was highlighted in glowing red. "His blood," the doctor said, his voice filled with wonder, "is not just alpha. It is of a purity I have only ever read about in ancient texts. The boy, he has the blood of the royal line." The room fell silent. Aria stared at the screen, not understanding. "Royal? What does that mean? He was just an Omega. Like me." "That is impossible," Dr. Callum stated flatly. "The genetics do not lie. This boy carries the dormant genes of the ancient royal family, the line we all believed went extinct 200 years ago. He looked directly at Aria, his gaze intense, which means one of his parents must carry it as well. Dante's crimson eyes bored into Aria, 1,000 questions swirling within them. He remembered the silver light from her birthmark, the vision of the Wolf Queen. It was all starting to connect in a way that defied logic. "Run a DNA test," Dante commanded, his voice tight. "Compare the boy's DNA to mine and to hers." Just then, a nurse peeked into the room. "Alpha, Dr. B, the boy is awake." Aria shot to her feet and rushed into the examination room. Ethan was sitting up in the bed, looking small and frail amidst the white sheets, but his eyes were clear for the first time in weeks. "Mommy," he said, his voice weak but happy. He reached for her. Aria hugged him, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Oh, my sweet boy." Ethan snuggled against her, his eyes drifting closed again. As he slipped back into a light sleep, he murmured, "Mommy, I saw Grandma again in my dream. She was so pretty. She said you're a princess." Behind them, Dr. Callum's breath hitched. He quickly excused himself. Pulling out his phone as he stepped into the hallway, he dialed a number he knew by heart. "Alpha Vincent," he said in a low, urgent voice. "It's Callum. You were right. I found her. And you won't believe this. She has a son." Inside the room, Dante watched Aria hold her child, his mind a whirlwind of suspicion, awe, and a fierce, undeniable possessiveness, a royal line, a mysterious power, a son who might very well be his own. He made a decision. "You and the boy are coming home with me," he said, his voice absolute, "to the Crimson Shadow territory. Until I have answers. You are both under my protection." Aria looked up at him, her stormy eyes filled with fear and uncertainty, but also a flicker of gratitude. For Ethan, she would do anything. She nodded. The Crimson Shadow territory was exactly as its name suggested, a fortress of dark. Volcanic rock rose from the heart of a dense, ancient forest where the trees grew so thick they blotted out the sun. The air was colder here, scented with pine, damp earth, and the raw, untamed power of the pack that called it home. As Aria stepped out of the car, carrying a sleeping Ethan, she felt hundreds of eyes on her. Pack members paused in their duties, their expressions ranging from cold curiosity to outright hostility. Whispers followed her, like ghosts. An Omega. Wolfless. What is she doing with the Alpha? A beautiful woman with fiery red hair and eyes the color of emeralds blocked their path to the fortress entrance. Her stance was challenging, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked Aria up and down with a sneer. "Dante," she said, her voice sharp, though her eyes were only for him. "What is this? You bring a stray Omega into our home?" "Stand down!" Mara, Dante's voice was a low warning. "She is under my protection." Mara, Dante's cousin, laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Protection, or your newest toy. A wolfless one at that. Have your standards fallen so low?" Aria flinched, pulling Ethan closer to her chest by she was used to scorn, but the venom in this woman's voice was potent. She kept her eyes down, her silence her only shield. She knew her place. She was here for her son, nothing more. "I will not warn you again," Dante growled, and this time, the sound was not entirely human. A flicker of fear crossed Mara's face before she masked it with arrogance. She stepped aside, but her hateful glare followed Aria all the way into the great hall of the castle. The first night was the hardest. Ethan was settled in a warm, comfortable room connected to hers, under the watchful eye of a pack nurse. But Aria couldn't sleep. She stood by the window of her own opulent room, a room larger than the entire servants' quarters she had grown up in, and stared out at the dark, forbidding forest. A strange sound drifted on the wind, a faint melodic humming that seemed to call to something deep inside her, something she thought had died long ago, a forgotten part of her soul. She fell into a restless sleep and dreamed. In her dream, a magnificent she-wolf with fur like spun silver and eyes like blue ice stood before her. The wolf didn't speak in words, but a message flowed into Aria's mind, warm and powerful. "Wake up, my child. It is time." Meanwhile, in his study, Dante was not sleeping either. He stared at a file on his desk, his jaw clenched. It was a security report from a hotel, dated 7 years ago, the same hotel where Aria had worked, the same hotel where, on one drunken, hazy night after a bitter argument with his father, he had been drugged by a rival and had woken up in a strange room, his memory of the night a complete blur. He had always dismissed it. A moment of weakness he preferred to forget. But the date, it was exactly 9 months before Ethan Winters was born. A chilling suspicion, so profound it felt like fate, began to take root in his heart. He had been so focused on the events of 2 nights ago, he had completely forgotten about the events of 7 years ago. Could it be? Was it possible that this wasn't their second night together, but their third? He stood up, a storm gathering in his crimson eyes. He needed to find Kieran. He needed to know exactly what had happened 7 years ago, and he needed to know now. Kieran arrived at the Crimson Shadow Fortress the next afternoon, summoned by a command from Dante that was impossible to refuse. He found Aria in the castle's secluded garden, a rare patch of sunlight in the otherwise gloomy domain. She looked different here. The fear was still in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by a new, quiet strength. Seeing her surrounded by the dark beauty of his brother's home sent a painful twist of regret through Kieran's gut. "Aria," he began, his voice strained. She didn't turn to look at him. "What do you want, Kieran?" Her tone was flat, devoid of the warmth it once held for him. "I came to explain." He took a step closer. "You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you." She finally faced him, her sea storm eyes pinning him in place. "You stood there. You let them call me a whore. You looked at me like I was dirt beneath your shoes. What is there to explain?" Pain flashed across his handsome face. "I was a coward," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "But there's more. Something you don't know. From years ago." He took a deep breath. 7 years ago, Aria, at the annual PAX summit. I knew it then. The moment you served me a drink, I smelled it. The scent of my mate. The goddess paired us. You were my fated mate. Aria stared at him, her heart stopping in her chest. His mate. All this time. But Kieran's voice dropped, full of self-loathing. You were a servant, an omega, wolfless. My father, the pack. They would never have accepted you as their Luna. They would have seen you as a weakness. And I was weak. I chose ambition over my own mate. The garden, which had seemed so peaceful moments before, now felt like it was closing in on her. The pain of this confession was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She had been rejected, thrown away like she was nothing. Serafina knew. Kieran continued, unable to meet her eyes. She saw the way I looked at you. She was jealous. She was the one who drugged you that night. 7 years ago, she wanted to ruin you, to make sure I would never choose you. She pushed you into a random room, hoping some drunken alpha would... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. So you just let her... Aria's voice was a broken whisper. You let her destroy me to protect your position. Yes, he said, the single word a condemnation. And I have regretted it every day since. When I heard you had a son, I knew he should have been mine. Now that I know who you truly are, Aria, please, it's not too late for us. We can still be together. You are my fated... She is not? Dante's voice came from the shadows of the garden archway. He had heard everything. He stepped into the light, his face a mask of cold fury. A possessive, dangerous aura rolled off him in waves. He came to stand beside Aria, a silent, immovable guardian. The goddess does not make mistakes, little brother, but werewolves do. You rejected her. The bond is broken. Obsidian was a raging inferno in his mind. He hurt her. He threw our mate away. She is ours, only ours. The raw jealousy and rage Dante felt surprised even himself. He looked from Kieran's desperate face to Aria's pale, heartbroken one. In the heat of the moment, Kieran let something slip, a detail he didn't realize was important. I just wanted a worthy Luna, someone powerful, someone with alpha blood, for the sake of our heirs. Aria's head snapped up. Alpha blood. Why would he be so obsessed with that? Unless he knew something. Did he know about her hidden lineage all along? Was his ambition even more twisted than she had imagined? Get out. Dante's voice was lethally soft. Leave my territory now. And if you ever come near her again, I will forget you are my brother. Kieran looked at the pure, murderous intent in Dante's eyes and took a step back. He gave Aria one last pleading look, but her face was a mask of stone. He had not just broken her heart, he had shattered any last vestige of respect she had for him. Defeated, Kieran turned and left. Aria stood trembling, the pieces of her past falling into a new, more painful arrangement. She was free of Kieran, truly and finally. But the truth had left a gaping wound in its place. She was not just unwanted. She had been a calculated sacrifice for a man's ambition. The revelation about Kieran left Aria adrift in a sea of emotional turmoil. To escape the suffocating walls of the castle, she found herself wandering into the forest that bordered the gardens. She needed space. She needed to breathe. She didn't know that Mara had been watching her. Fueled by jealousy and a desire to put the Omega in her place, Mara had done something reckless. She had paid a small group of rogue wolves, outcasts, and criminals to stage an accident, just enough to scare Aria away, to show her she didn't belong. Aria ventured deeper into the woods than she intended, the silence of the ancient trees a soothing balm. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a low, menacing growl. She froze. 4 large, mangy wolves emerged from the trees, surrounding her. Their eyes glowed with malice, their lips peeled back to reveal yellowed fangs. These were not pack wolves, they were rogues. Look what we have here, the leader sneered, his voice a rough gravel, a little lamb, lost in the woods. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Aria's numbness. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. I don't want any trouble. Too late for that. Another rogue laughed. The pretty redhead paid us well to teach you a lesson. Mara, of course. The leader lunged. Aria cried out. Stumbling backward over a tree root, she fell hard, her arm scraping against a sharp rock. Pain flared, and warm blood trickled down her skin. The scent of her blood hit the air, and the rogue's eyes went wild with bloodlust. But something else happened. As her blood touched the earth, the crescent moon birthmark on her back flared with a brilliant, blinding silver light. The light pulsed, not just on her skin, but deep within her soul, reaching into a place that had been dormant and silent for 7 long years. A howl of agony and ecstasy tore from Aria's throat as a power she had forgotten she possessed erupted within her. Lyra. The name of her wolf bloomed in her mind. A wave of energy, cool and powerful like moonlight, surged through her veins. She felt bones shifting, reforming. The pain was excruciating, but it was also a homecoming. The rogues stopped in their tracks, their snarls turning to whimpers of confusion and fear. The woman cowering on the ground was gone. In her place, a wolf was rising. And it was magnificent. Lyra was not a normal wolf. Her fur was the color of liquid starlight, a shimmering, incandescent silver that seemed to glow from within. Her body was sleek and powerful, larger than any of the mangy rogues that surrounded her. And her eyes were the color of glacial ice, ancient and filled with an authority that commanded respect. She rose to her full height and let out a howl. It was not a sound of aggression, but of pure, unadulterated power. The howl rolled through the forest, a wave of sonic dominance that shook the very leaves on the trees. Every wolf within a 10-mile radius felt it. It was a command, an announcement, a claiming of territory. On the training grounds, Dante's head snapped up. The sound hit him like a physical blow, bypassing his ears and vibrating directly in his soul. Obsidian reared up in his mind, not in aggression, but in awe. Queen. His wolf breathed. Back in the forest, the 4 rogues were flattened against the ground, whining and exposing their throats in a universal sign of absolute submission. They were utterly terrified. Lyra took a step forward, her ice blue eyes fixing on the leader. She didn't need to growl. Her very presence was a threat. At that moment, Dante burst through the trees in his own wolf form Obsidian, a colossal beast of midnight black fur and burning crimson eyes. He skidded to a halt, his breath catching in his throat at the sight before him. The silver wolf. She was more beautiful, more powerful than anything he had ever imagined. From a hiding spot in the trees, Mara watched, her face ashen with shock and terror. This was not the wolf-less Omega she had meant to intimidate. This was something else, something divine. In the sky above them, for just a fleeting moment, the clouds seemed to part, forming the ethereal image of a silver crown before dissolving back into nothing. The oldest wolves of the Crimson Shadow Pack, who felt the howl from miles away, would later whisper to each other in hushed tones, their eyes wide with disbelief. The royal sigil. It had returned. The immense surge of power was too much for Aria's human body to handle after 7 years of dormancy. Lyra's form wavered, and she collapsed, shifting back into her human shape as she fell. Dante shifted back in an instant, rushing to her side. He gathered her unconscious form into his arms, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked at the cowering rogues, a murderous promise in his eyes, before turning his attention back to the woman in his arms. Her scent, her power, the royal sigil in the sky. The pieces were no longer just connecting. They were forming a picture so incredible, so world-altering, that he could barely comprehend it. Aria slept for 2 days. During that time, Dante did not leave her side. He sat in a chair by her bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, his mind racing. The DNA results had come back. Ethan was his son. The confirmation should have been a seismic shock, but in the wake of seeing Lyra, it felt like a simple, logical fact. Of course Ethan was his son. Of course the boy had royal blood, because his mother was the source. He pieced it all together. The night 7 years ago. The boy with royal genes. The silver wolf whose power made even him. An alpha of alphas. Want to bow his head in reverence. This wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny. Woven into a tapestry so complex he was only just beginning to see the pattern. Dr. Callum entered the room quietly, holding a medical chart. "How is she?" Dante asked, his voice low. "Her body is recovering from the strain of a forced shift after years of dormancy. She'll be fine," the doctor assured him. He looked at Aria's sleeping form with an expression of profound respect. The rogues confessed everything. It was Mara. Dante's jaw tightened. "She will be dealt with." His tone was final. He looked back at Callum, his crimson eyes intense. "Tell me what you know." "Callum, no more riddles. Who is she?" Dr. Callum sighed, polishing his glasses on his coat. Alpha. There are legends, stories that my order has protected for centuries, about the royal bloodline. We believed it was lost, that the last queen, Selene, perished without an heir. You think Aria is her heir? Dante pressed. I think, Callum chose his words carefully, that there are truths in this world that have been deliberately buried, truths that were hidden to protect the innocent. I cannot give you the answers you seek. I do not have the authority. Then who does Dante? Demanded, his patience wearing thin. Only one person, Callum said, the man who was Queen Selene's sworn shield, the man who has been secretly watching over her bloodline for 25 years. As if on cue, one of Dante's guards entered the room, holding a sealed envelope embossed with the sigil of a snarling white wolf on a field of blue, the sigil of the Northern Vale Pack. A message from Alpha Vincent Stormbringer. Alpha, the guard announced. Dante took the letter and broke the seal. The message was brief and to the point. Alpha Blackthorn. It is time we spoke. Your guest, Miss Aria Winters, is a person of great importance. Her future, and the future of her son, concerns us all. I invite you both to my territory in the Northern Vale. There are things you need to know, things only I can tell you. Vincent Stormbringer. Dante looked from the letter to Aria's sleeping face. Northern Vale, the most powerful, most neutral territory in the continent, and Alpha Vincent, a leader respected and feared by all. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. He knew what he had to do. When Aria awoke, they would travel north. He would stand by her side, not just as the father of her child, not just as her protector, but as a wolf who had just witnessed the return of his queen. He would follow her into the heart of the storm, and he would not rest until he had uncovered every last secret surrounding the incredible woman who had crashed into his life and changed it forever. The journey north was a quiet affair. They traveled in one of Dante's armored vehicles, a silent cocoon moving through a world of green and gray. Ethan, healthier and more energetic than Aria had seen him in years, chattered happily in the back seat, occasionally asking Dante questions about the trees or the animals, calling him Mr. Dante with a childish formality that made a muscle twitch in Dante's jaw. For Aria, the enclosed space was both a comfort and a trial. Dante's presence was overwhelming. He sat beside her, not touching, but she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the constant, intoxicating scent of pine and storm. It was a scent her body now recognized, a scent Lyra yearned for. Her wolf, now awake, was a constant, purring presence in the back of her mind, content and calm simply by being near Obsidian. You're quiet, Dante observed, his voice a low rumble that didn't disturb the sleeping child in the back. Aria looked at her hands, still marveling at the fact that they could now sheathe claws. I'm processing, she admitted. 7 years. My wolf was gone for 7 years. I thought I had lost her forever. She was never gone, Dante said, his crimson eyes fixed on the road ahead. She was just waiting. There was a finality in his tone that made her believe him. The silence that fell between them wasn't awkward. It was filled with unspoken things, with the shared memory of a fevered night, the raw power of her transformation in the forest, and the tiny sleeping boy who was a living bridge between them. They stopped for the night at a secluded lodge owned by Dante's pack. After Ethan was tucked into bed, Aria found she couldn't sleep. The moon was full, a perfect luminous circle in the black sky, calling to Lyra. She found Dante on a balcony overlooking the moonlit forest. He was already staring at the sky, as if he had been waiting for her. She wants to run, Aria whispered, her hand on her heart, where Lyra was pacing excitedly. So does he, Dante replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was a silent agreement. They walked into the forest, and this time, the shift was not born of pain and fear, but of freedom and joy. The change was swift, almost painless. Lyra's silver fur shone like a beacon in the moonlight. Obsidian was a shadow at her side, a creature of midnight and power. For a wolf to run peacefully alongside another who was not their fated mate was rare. But as they moved together, their paws barely making a sound on the forest floor, it felt more right than anything either of them had ever known. This felt like destiny, a true, undeniable bond that had nothing to do with Kieran's selfish claims. They ran for hours, a flash of silver and a streak of black under the watchful eye of the moon. They didn't hunt. They didn't fight. They simply ran, reveling in the shared strength, the perfect synchronicity of their movements. It was a conversation without words, a dance of two souls who had finally found their other half. Later, as they lay in their human forms on a bed of soft moss, breathing heavily under the stars, the air between them was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with wolves and everything to do with the man and woman they were. "Aria," Dante said, his voice husky. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. Her heart hammered in her chest. A wild, frantic rhythm. This was different from the drugged haze of their first night. This was real. This was terrifying. But before the moment could break, a small voice echoed in her mind. It wasn't Lyra. It sounded like Ethan. "Grandma, she's waiting for us in the castle of snow." Aria sat up, blinking. A dream, a memory. As they finally approached the gates of the Northern Vale territory the next day, a strange sense of familiarity washed over her. The towering, snow-dusted mountains, the scent of the frosty air, the way the light filtered through the pale birch trees. It felt like coming home, a home she'd never known. Alpha Vincent Stormbringer was not what Aria had expected. She had pictured a fierce, warlike figure. Instead, the man who greeted them in the great hall of his ice-carved castle was in his 50s, with kind, slate-gray eyes and hair the color of frosted steel. He carried an air of immense power, but it was tempered by a deep, world-weary sorrow. The moment his eyes landed on Aria, they filled with an astonishing, unshed grief. He took a shaky step forward, his gaze tracing her features as if he were seeing a ghost. "Celine," he whispered, the name a breath of pure pain. Then he seemed to catch himself. "Forgive me. You look so much like her, your mother." Aria's breath caught in her throat. "My mother, I was told I was an orphan. I never knew my mother." "I know," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion, "because I am the one who hid you. For 25 years, I have watched over you from a distance, praying this day would never come, and praying that it would." Dante moved to stand slightly in front of Aria. "A protective shield. What is the meaning of this?" "Vincent, tell us the truth." Vincent nodded, gesturing for them to sit near a large, roaring fireplace. He began to speak, his voice painting a picture of a world Aria had never known. 25 years ago, I was not an Alpha. I was the captain of the Royal Guard, sworn to protect Queen Celine, the last of the royal line. His eyes took on a distant look, lost in memory. She was a kind and just ruler, but there were those on the Alpha Council who coveted her power. They saw her compassion as weakness. They plotted against her, led by a ruthless Alpha named Morgath. He paused, his hands clenching into fists. They staged a coup. A bloody, terrible night. I tried to get her to safety, but she was pregnant. With you. Aria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dante's hand found hers, his strong fingers lacing through her own, a silent anchor in the storm of this revelation. "We were cornered," Vincent continued. "I was grievously wounded. Before the traitors broke through, Celine used the last of her power to create a diversion. She made me swear an oath to find her child and protect her, no matter the cost. She handed you to me, a tiny, sleeping bundle. And then she faced them alone, to buy us time." His voice broke. "She died so that you could live." Tears streamed down Aria's face, tears for a mother she'd never met, for a life that had been stolen from her. "I brought you to the Silvercrest territory, one of the few places I knew Morgath's influence hadn't reached. I gave you to a kind Omega family who had just lost their own child, making them promise to raise you as their own. I watched from afar, my heart breaking every time you were mistreated, but I couldn't interfere. To reveal your identity would have been to sign your death warrant. Morgath and his followers have been hunting for any sign of the royal bloodline ever since." Dante was stunned into silence. He looked at Aria, at the woman he had taken from a party, the woman he had claimed as his own. She wasn't a servant. She wasn't just an Omega. She was a princess, the rightful queen of all werewolves. Aria shook her head, overwhelmed. "No, it can't be. I'm nobody. I don't have any power." "Don't you?" Vincent asked gently. "Your wolf, Lyra. She is a royal silver wolf, not seen in 2 centuries. And the birthmark on your back, that is no mere mark, child." He stood and pointed to a large, dust-covered portrait hanging over the mantelpiece. With a flick of his wrist, he used a touch of alpha power to clear the dust away. It was a portrait of a breathtakingly beautiful woman with silver hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the exact same shade of a stormy sea as Aria's. She was the spitting image of Aria, and on her back, just visible over the edge of her gown, was a delicate crescent moon mark. "That," Vincent said, his voice trembling with reverence, "is the Queen's seal, and it belongs to you now." Dante's mind was still reeling. A lost princess, a hidden queen. It sounded like a children's fairy tale. His protective instincts were at war with his pragmatic nature. "This is a powerful story, Vincent," Dante said, his voice even, though his heart was pounding. "But stories can be manipulated. How can we be certain this isn't some elaborate deception?" Vincent's expression was not offended, but understanding. A wise question. Alpha Blackthorn, words are wind, but magic does not lie. There is one way to prove her lineage beyond any shadow of a doubt. We must go to the altar of the ancients. He led them deep into the heart of the mountain, through tunnels carved by magic and time, until they reached a vast circular cavern. The air here was humming with dormant power. In the center of the cavern stood a single, massive slab of moonstone, etched with swirling, ancient runes, the altar. "This altar was created by the first queen," Vincent explained, his voice echoing in the cavern. "It is keyed directly to the royal bloodline. Only one who carries that blood can awaken it. For 200 years, it has been silent." Aria looked at the altar, her heart filled with a mixture of terror and a strange, magnetic pull. It felt like the humming in the air was coming from inside her own bones. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Place your hand upon it," Vincent instructed gently, "and let it recognize you." Dante squeezed her hand one last time. "I'm right here," he murmured, his crimson eyes full of a fierce belief that gave her strength. Taking a deep breath, Aria stepped forward. She lifted her trembling hand and pressed her palm against the cool, smooth surface of the moonstone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the runes beneath her palm began to glow with a soft, silver light. The light spread, racing through the etched lines like electricity, until the entire altar was blazing with a light so bright they had to shield their eyes. The humming in the cavern grew into a powerful, melodic chorus. A wave of energy surged up Aria's arm, not painful but overwhelming. Images flooded her mind 1,000 lifetimes, 1,000 faces, all women with her eyes, her silver wolf. She saw them ruling, fighting, loving, and dying. She felt their joy, their sorrow, their strength. It was the collective memory of the queens, and it was flowing into her. A gasp was torn from her lips as Lyra howled in her mind, a sound of pure, triumphant recognition. The power was too much. Her knees buckled, but Dante was there in an instant, catching her, his strong arms a grounding force in the whirlwind of magic. As the light from the altar shot up and hit the roof of the cavern, a shockwave of pure royal energy pulsed outwards. Every single wolf in the Northern Vale territory, from the strongest warrior to the smallest pup, felt it. They stopped what they were doing, their heads snapping up as one. An ancient, primal instinct took over, and without a conscious thought, they all sank to their knees, their heads bowed in a direction they instinctively knew was toward the heart of the mountain. The queen had returned. The news would spread like wildfire to every pack, every territory. The lost bloodline was not lost. The throne was not empty. But as the light in the cavern slowly faded, Aria knew this was not just a validation, it was a declaration. To her allies, it was a beacon of hope. But to the enemies who had lurked in the shadows for 2 centuries, it was a target, and she had just painted it on her own back. The news of a returned royal heir hit the Silver Crest pack like a tidal wave. For Kieran, it was a special kind of hell. The wolfless Omega he had discarded, the woman he had allowed his fiancée to humiliate, was a princess, the rightful ruler of them all. He had thrown away a queen. The regret was a physical sickness, a bitter poison in his veins. "I told you," Seraphina said, her voice sharp as she paced his study. Her own plans were in ruins. Marrying Kieran was meant to be a step up, but now he was just the alpha who had rejected royalty. If she is a princess, your rejection of her is not just a personal failure, it's an insult to the throne. You'll be a laughingstock. Kieran slammed his fist on his desk. "I know that. Don't you think I know that?" He wanted her back, not just for the power, but because the ghost of their broken mate bond was a constant, dull ache in his soul. He had to get her back. He didn't know that his desperate ambition was being watched. Far from the politics of the established packs, in a hidden fortress wreathed in shadow and fear, Morgath received the news. He was ancient, his body scarred from 1,000 battles, his heart twisted by 2 centuries of exile and hatred. The news of Celine's heir didn't just anger him, it infuriated him. "She lives," he snarled, his voice like grinding stone. "Celine's brat lives." His goal had always been simple: to eradicate the royal bloodline and seize power for himself, to create a world where only the strong survived, a world built on blood and fear. Aria's existence was a threat to everything he had built. "She is still weak," one of his lieutenants hissed, "untrained. Now is the time to strike." Morgath's lips curved into a cruel smile. "A direct assault is clumsy. The girl has powerful allies now, Stormbringer and that Blackthorn cur." He tapped a clawed finger on a map. "No, we will use the snakes already in her garden." He dispatched his most subtle assassins, not to kill Aria, but to manipulate the pawns already on the board. One went to Seraphina, preying on her jealousy and fear of being cast aside. He offered her a way to eliminate Aria permanently, framing it as a way to secure her own future. Another went to Kieran, speaking to the deep well of his regret and ambition. "She is your fated mate," the shadow whispered in his ear. "The bond is not truly broken. It can be reforged. You must get her back, for the good of your pack, for your own destiny." And a third operative was sent to the Crimson Shadow territory, their target Mara. They found her stewing in her own bitter resentment, having been punished by Dante for her actions against Aria. The Shadow offered her a chance for revenge, a chance to reclaim her place at Dante's side by removing the Omega who had stolen it. The pieces were being moved. A web of jealousy, ambition, and betrayal was being woven around Aria. And she, busy taking her first steps into a world of unimaginable power, was completely unaware of the darkness gathering on her horizon. Aria and Dante remained in the Northern Vale. It was a sanctuary, a place where Vincent could begin teaching Aria about her heritage and the immense power that now thrummed just beneath her skin. The lessons were exhausting. She learned that she could feel the emotional state of the pack wolves around her, a constant hum of joy, anxiety, and loyalty. Vincent taught her how to shield her mind, to build walls against the overwhelming flood of sensation. Her most surprising teacher, however, was Dante. He took it upon himself to train her physically. The wolfless girl who had stumbled in heels now learned how to fight, how to move with a predator's grace. They spent hours in the training yard, the ring of their practice swords echoing in the cold mountain air. "You're thinking too much," he'd say, his voice a low rumble as he easily disarmed her for the 10th time. "Feel what Lara is telling you. Let your instincts guide you." During one session, she lunged, and he sidestepped, using her own momentum to spin her around and trap her against his chest. Her back was pressed against his hard body, his arm a steel band around her waist, his other hand holding her wrist. She was utterly trapped. Her breath hitched. She could feel every muscle in his chest, the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her shoulder blades, his scent pine, storm, and something uniquely, intoxicatingly Dante filled her senses, making her head swim. "Better," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, sending a delicious shiver down her spine. "You almost had me." He was so close. The casual intimacy of their training, the constant physical contact, was weaving a dangerous, delicate thread between them. He wasn't just her protector anymore. He was becoming her anchor, her partner. She could feel his own control fraying at the edges. She would catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his crimson eyes filled with a raw, possessive heat that made her skin tingle one evening. As she was laughing at something Ethan had said, she looked up and saw him staring at her with such unguarded tenderness that it stole her breath away. Aria found herself falling for him, a slow, terrifying, and utterly inevitable descent after Kieran. She had sworn never to trust an alpha again, never to make herself so vulnerable. But Dante wasn't like Kieran. He didn't want her for her title or her power. He had protected her when she was a nobody, a wolfless servant. He had claimed her when she had nothing. Her heart, which she thought had been shattered beyond repair, was beginning to piece itself back together, and every new piece seemed to have Dante's name etched upon it. The day of Ethan's transplant arrived. The procedure was delicate, requiring Dr. Callum's expertise and a state-of-the-art medical suite within Vincent's fortress. Aria was a nervous wreck, pacing the waiting room like a caged animal. Dante stood by the window, a silent, imposing figure. He had been the one to donate the marrow, his blood, a perfect match for his son's. The reality of it was still a fresh, raw wound. Finally, he could stand the silence no longer. He turned to face her, Aria. She stopped pacing, her stormy eyes wide with anxiety. "Is something wrong?" "We need to talk." He walked over to her, his presence seeming to shrink the large room. He looked down at her, his expression a rare mixture of vulnerability and resolve. About Ethan, about 7 years ago. Aria's heart began to beat a frantic tattoo against her ribs. That night, at the summit, he began, his voice rough. "I was there. I was drugged by a rival. My memory of the night is fragmented, hazy, but I remember a scent, wildflowers. I remember a small room, and I remember waking up alone, feeling like a part of my soul had been ripped away." He took her hands in his. They were so much larger, warmer, calloused from years of training, yet his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Aria. The DNA results came back before we left my territory. There is no doubt. I am Ethan's father." The words hung in the air between them. Aria stared at him, her mind racing, connecting the dots. His protective instincts from the very beginning. The strange sense of familiarity she had felt, the way Ethan seemed so comfortable around him, it all made a strange, painful kind of sense. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel betrayed. All she felt was a profound, overwhelming wave of relief. The secret she had carried, the shame of not knowing, it all washed away. Ethan had a father, and it was this man, this strong, honorable, and unexpectedly gentle man who had saved them both. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. I think a part of me always knew, she whispered. My heart, it recognized you. He lifted a hand, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. His touch lingered, a feather-light caress that sent sparks dancing across her skin. The air grew thick, charged with 7 years of unspoken connection. Just then, the door opened, and Dr. Callum entered, a wide, relieved smile on his face. The procedure was a complete success. He announced, "The transplant has been accepted. Ethan is going to make a full recovery." Aria let out a sob of pure joy and threw her arms around Dante's neck. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist, holding her tight against him for the first time. It wasn't as a protector or a trainer. He held her as the mother of his child, the woman who was rapidly becoming the center of his universe, and in the safety of his embrace. Aria finally allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope for a future she had never dared to imagine. Weeks passed. Ethan grew stronger every day, his laughter echoing through the halls of the ice castle, with the weight of his illness lifted. Aria was able to fully focus on her training, her power growing in leaps and bounds under Vincent's tutelage. The bond between her and Dante deepened with each passing day. The longing was a constant, simmering heat between them, an invisible string that pulled them together. They both knew what was happening. Their wolves, Lyra and Obsidian, recognized each other with a certainty that defied logic. They were not a pairing made by a fickle goddess and broken by a weak man. They were two halves of a whole, forged in shadow and brought together by fate. They were true mates. On the night of the next full moon, the pull was undeniable. Dante found her on the same balcony where they had first decided to run together. She was bathed in moonlight, her silver-streaked hair looking like spun starlight. The look in her eyes was a raw, open invitation that made his heart thunder in his chest. Dante. She breathed his name, and it was both a question and a plea. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He didn't say a word. He simply lowered his head, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she rose on her toes, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was both a first and a homecoming. It was nothing like the drugged, hazy encounter of their first night. This was a kiss of choice, of clarity. It was gentle at first, a soft exploration, but it quickly deepened, ignited by weeks of suppressed desire. It was a kiss that spoke of protection, of partnership, of a love that had been waiting a lifetime to be acknowledged. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "Aria," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my mate, my Luna, my queen, in this life and every life after." Tears of joy pricked her eyes. "And you are mine," she whispered, her voice shaking. "My Alpha, my heart." It was then that they both felt it, the final, magical click of the mate bond locking into place. A golden thread of light, visible only to them, seemed to connect their hearts. The empty space in their souls, the space they hadn't even known was there, was suddenly filled. They were complete. "Let me mark you," he growled, the sound a deep, possessive rumble in his chest. "Let the whole world know you belong to me." "Yes," she breathed, without a moment's hesitation. He tilted her head to the side, exposing the sensitive skin of her neck. She felt the sharp prick of his canines, a brief, fleeting pain that was immediately followed by a wave of pure ecstasy, A surge of his power, his strength, his very essence, flooded her system, branding her soul as his. She arched against him, a cry of pleasure escaping her lips as the bite healed, leaving behind a faint, silvery mark that only other werewolves could see. She knew she needed to claim him in return, guided by an instinct as old as time. She mirrored the action, her own teeth sinking gently into the side of his neck. His groan of pleasure vibrated through her, and she felt the bond solidify, a two-way connection, a perfect, unbreakable circle. They were one, made-ed, bound together by magic, fate, and a love that had conquered all obstacles. Whatever threats lay ahead, whatever darkness was gathering, they would face it together. With the mate bond solidifying her connection to her own power, Aria's abilities blossomed at an astonishing rate. Vincent moved her training from simple shields to active manifestations of her royal magic. The royal bloodline is not just about dominance, he explained as they stood by a frozen lake. It is about connection. You are the heart of the werewolf people. You feel what they feel. He demonstrated by pointing to a wolf who had injured its paw during a patrol. Reach out with your mind, Aria. Don't just see the wound, feel it. Then, picture it healing. Pour your own life force, the silver light within you, into that picture. Aria closed her eyes, concentrating. She felt a jolt of pain in her own leg, a sympathetic echo of the wolf's injury. It was startling, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she visualized a gentle, silvery light enveloping the wolf's paw, knitting the torn flesh back together. She opened her eyes and gasped. The wound was completely gone. The wolf licked its paw in surprise before bounding over to her and nudging her hand in gratitude. Incredible, she breathed. But the power came at a cost. The healing left her feeling drained, lightheaded. Vincent nodded grimly. It is a great power, but it is also a great burden. It draws from your own life energy. If you are not careful, it can consume you. Her other abilities were even more startling. She discovered that her commands were not suggestions. During a sparring match with a Northern Vale warrior, she became frustrated and yelled, "Drop your weapon," to her shock. The warrior's hand went slack, and his sword clattered to the ground, his eyes wide with confusion as if his own body had betrayed him. He hadn't chosen to obey. He had been compelled to. This was the power the Alpha Council had feared, the power to command absolute loyalty or absolute submission. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She began to understand the weight of the crown she had never asked for. This power wasn't for her. It was for her people. It was a tool to heal, to protect, to unite. She spent every waking moment practicing, pushing her limits, learning to control the immense, ancient force that now lived within her. She had to be ready. Ready for Morgath. Ready for the traitors who had killed her mother. Ready to protect her new family, Ethan, and the fierce, loving Alpha who now wore her mark on his neck. She would not be the frightened servant girl anymore. She would be the queen they needed her to be. Life in the Northern Vale had become a strange kind of normal. Days were filled with training, and nights were filled with the quiet, growing intimacy between her and Dante, but the outside world could not be kept at bay forever. A formal invitation arrived from the Silver Crest Pack. It was for their annual founding celebration. The letter, penned by Kieran himself, was filled with fawning apologies and a formal request for Princess Aria to grace the celebration with her presence. He wrote, to publicly acknowledge her and atone for his past behavior. Dante read the letter over her shoulder, his body tense. It's a trap. I know, Aria said, her gaze distant. He's not doing this out of remorse. He's doing it to save face, to try and get back in my good graces. Then we will refuse, Dante stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. No, Aria said, turning to face him. We have to go. He frowned. why it's too dangerous. Because hiding here forever isn't a solution, she argued, her voice gaining strength. Sooner or later, I have to face them all. I have to face Kieran and show him he no longer has any power over me. I have to show the world that I am not afraid. It's time I stopped acting like a frightened princess and started acting like a queen. He saw the resolve in her eyes, the steel in her spine, and a fierce pride swelled in his chest. She was right. Then I'm going with you, he said, and a full guard of my Crimson Shadow warriors. Vincent agreed, though his expression was heavy with worry. He insisted Ethan stay behind in the safety of the Northern Vale, under Dr. Callum's care. Before they left, Dante presented Aria with a gift. It was a simple, elegant necklace, a silver chain holding a single, polished piece of obsidian. It has been in my family for generations, he said, his voice low as he fastened it around her neck. It is enchanted. It will warm against your skin if you are in the presence of a direct threat, a small warning. It's beautiful, she whispered, her fingers tracing the cool, smooth stone. It felt solid, a tangible piece of his strength she could carry with her. Thank you. He pulled her into a fierce embrace. Be careful, Aria. My heart goes with you. And mine stays with you, she replied. Her voice muffled against his chest. As they set off for the Silver Crest territory, a place that held nothing but painful memories, a sense of deep unease settled over Aria. The obsidian necklace was already feeling faintly, almost imperceptibly, warmer against her skin. The Silver Crest territory was just as Aria remembered, but her reception was worlds apart. Kieran greeted her at the gates, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the ground. He was effusive in his welcome, his words dripping with a reverence that felt utterly false. Princess Aria, you honor us with your presence. My pack is overjoyed to welcome you home. Home, Aria thought, her lip curling slightly. This place was never my home. It was my prison. The celebration was a grand affair. The great hall was filled with hundreds of guests from neighboring packs. Kieran made a great show of leading her to the seat of honor, publicly apologizing for his past blindness and toasting to her health and her return. Serafina, too, played her part, approaching Aria with a mask of deep remorse. Princess, she said, her voice soft and repentant. I was a fool, blinded by jealousy. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. It was a masterful performance. To the outside world, it looked like a beautiful reconciliation, but Aria could feel the truth. Lyra was pacing restlessly in her mind, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Lies. Her wolf snarled. Deceit. The air is thick with it. The obsidian necklace on her chest was now undeniably warm, a constant, low-grade heat against her skin. She scanned the room, her senses on high alert. Dante's Crimson Shadow guards were positioned strategically, but she noticed, with a prickle of alarm, that one of them was missing from his post, then another. She tried to catch Dante's eye, but he was engaged in a tense, political conversation with another alpha. Later in the evening, Serafina approached her again, holding 2 glasses of wine, a toast, she said with a bright, brittle smile, to new beginnings, a truce between us. I don't drink, Aria said coolly. Kieran appeared at Serafina's side. Nonsense, princess. It is our pack's tradition to seal a truce with a shared drink. To refuse would be a great insult. He pushed the glass gently toward her hand. The pressure from the surrounding alphas, all watching them, was immense. To make a scene would be a political disaster, believing herself immune to most simple toxins due to her royal blood. Aria relented. She took the glass and drank a single. Polite sip. The wine tasted bitter. She set the glass down, her eyes meeting Dante's across the room. She gave him a subtle shake of her head. Something was wrong, very wrong. He started to move toward her, but it was too late. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The room began to spin. Her legs felt like lead, and a fire started burning in her veins, 1,000 times worse than the aphrodisiac Seraphina had given her before. Her hand flew to her throat as she struggled to breathe. She looked at Kieran and Seraphina, and through the haze of pain, she saw the flicker of triumph in their eyes. This wasn't a simple poison. It was something else, something ancient and deadly. She collapsed, the world fading to black as a single. Horrifying thought pierced through the agony they had succeeded. The name of the poison bloomed in Aria's mind, a whispered warning from Lyra: wolfsbane. It was a legendary poison, fatal to werewolves, attacking their lupine side, tearing the wolf from the human. The pain was indescribable. It felt like her soul was being ripped in two. Black blood, tinged with silver, trickled from the corner of her mouth. Lyra was howling in her mind, a sound of pure agony as the poison worked to sever their connection. The crescent moon mark on her back, once a source of light, began to flicker and dim, turning a sickly shade of gray. Chaos erupted in the hall. Kieran put on a masterful show of shock and horror. Poison! Someone has poisoned the princess guards. Find them. Seraphina was even better, letting out a theatrical scream and pointing at a terrified servant. It was him. I saw him tamper with the wine. Dante's Crimson Shadow guards tried to push through the crowd to get to Aria, but they were suddenly surrounded and blocked by Kieran's warriors, who claimed they were securing the scene. It was a perfectly executed trap. Miles away, in the northern vale, Dante felt it, a searing, white-hot pain shot through the mate bond, so intense it brought him to his knees. It felt like a part of his own soul was being extinguished. Obsidian roared, a sound of pure, untempered fury and grief. Mate, they are killing our mate. Dante was on his feet in an instant, his human facade melting away to reveal the terrifying Alpha beneath. His eyes bled from crimson to burning gold. They will pay for this, he snarled, his voice a deathly promise. He didn't wait for his guards. He burst from the hall and shifted mid-stride, a black blur of rage and desperation, running faster than he had ever run in his life. Silver Crest was miles away. He prayed to a goddess he barely believed in that he wouldn't be too late. Back in the hall, as Aria's life force faded, a new presence emerged from the shadows. It was Morgath. He moved with a chilling, unhurried grace, the panicked crowd parting before him as if sensing the ancient evil that radiated from him. Kieran and Seraphina were nothing more than puppets, and their master had arrived to claim his prize. His cold, reptilian eyes fixed on Aria's dying form. At last, he hissed, a sound of victory that had been 2 centuries in the making. The line of Selene ends tonight. He reached down with a clawed hand, his intention clear to take her, dead or alive, and absorb what was left of her royal power. Kieran and Seraphina watched, their faces pale with terror. They had made a deal with a devil, and he had come to collect. Aria's vision was tunneling to black. Her last conscious thought was of 2 faces Ethan's, bright and laughing, and Dante's, his crimson eyes soft with love. I'm sorry, she thought. I failed you. Then there was only darkness. As Morgath's claws were about to close around Aria's throat, a figure threw herself in his path. It was Seraphina. Her face was a mess of tears and terror, her perfect mask finally shattered. No, she choked out. Stop, I can't let you do this. Morgath paused, an eyebrow raised in amusement. You dare to defy me. Little girl, you helped set this trap. I did it because you have him, she cried, her voice cracking. You took the man I truly love, a beta warrior from my pack, and threatened to kill him if I didn't cooperate. But I didn't think you would actually. I can't have her death on my conscience. The raw confession hung in the air. Her ambition, her jealousy, it had all been a front, a desperate act to save someone she loved, seeing Aria, an innocent woman, dying on the floor because of her actions had finally broken through her fear. She drew a ceremonial dagger from her belt. "I won't let you take her." Kieran, who had been frozen in shock, finally moved. The sight of Serafina, the woman he was supposed to marry, risking her life for a man he didn't even know existed, and for the woman he had wronged, shook him from his stupor. He had been a pawn, manipulated by his own weakness. With a roar of shame and fury, he shifted, his gray wolf launching itself at Morgath. But it was a futile gesture. Morgath swatted Kieran aside like a fly. He backhanded Serafina, sending her flying across the room where she crumpled in a heap. The ancient Alpha was simply too powerful. Just as Morgath turned his attention back to Aria, the great doors of the hall exploded inwards. Dante was there, a whirlwind of black fur and crimson-eyed fury. The Crimson Shadow warriors were right behind him. The hall descended into a maelstrom of claws and fangs as Dante's forces crashed into Morgath's hidden soldiers. Dante, in his wolf form, went straight for Morgath. The two alphas collided in a clash that shook the very foundations of the building, but even Dante was struggling against Morgath's dark, unnatural strength. Suddenly, a new figure appeared at Aria's side. Dr. Callum, flanked by Alpha Vincent and his royal guard, had followed Dante, their arrival a perfectly timed cavalry. The wolfsbane only truly kills those with alpha. Beta, or Omega blood, Callum said, his voice urgent as he knelt beside Aria. But royal blood, it fights back. It just needs a catalyst. He produced a syringe filled with a shimmering, silver liquid, the Queen's heart serum. He explained to Vincent, derived from a sample of Queen Celine's own blood, preserved for this very day. He plunged the needle into Aria's arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Aria's body lay still and cold. Then, the crescent moon mark on her back, which had faded to black, suddenly blazed to life. It didn't just glow, it erupted. A column of pure, blinding silver light shot up from her body, engulfing her completely. The fighting stopped. Everyone, wolf and human, stared in stunned silence at the pillar of divine energy. Inside the light, the poison was not just being neutralized, it was being burned away, consumed by a power 1,000 times stronger. Her blood was not just healing, it was purifying, reawakening, ascending. The servant girl was dying, the lost princess was fading, and in their place, a queen was being reborn. The pillar of silver light pulsed, bathing the entire hall in an ethereal glow. Inside the cocoon of energy, Aria's body lifted from the floor. Suspended in midair, her simple dress seemed to dissolve, replaced by ethereal robes of woven moonlight. A crown of pure, shimmering silver energy formed above her head. Lyra, who had been nearly extinguished by the poison, was reborn with her. Her spiritual form grew, her fur becoming so bright it was difficult to look at, her size doubling. She was no longer just a wolf, she was a divine avatar of the moon itself. The light finally receded, gently lowering Aria back to the floor. She stood, not as the girl who had collapsed, but as something more. Her stormy eyes now held the wisdom of 100 generations of queens. The power rolling off her was immense, a calm, unstoppable tide. She looked at Morgath, who was staring at her, his ancient face a mask of disbelief and horror. "You," she said, and her voice was different. It was her own, but layered with the echoes of all the queens before her. It held an authority that was absolute. "The betrayer of my mother's court, I remember you now." The memories of Queen Celine, a gift from the Queen's heart serum, were now hers. She saw his treason, his jealousy, his bloody betrayal, as if she had been there herself. She raised a single, elegant hand, "Kneel." It was not a request, it was a law of nature. Every single wolf in the room, friend and foe alike, felt an irresistible force press down on them. Their bodies moved against their will, their knees hitting the floor, their heads bowing in submission. The mighty warriors of the Crimson Shadow, Kieran's pack, even Morgath's own soldiers, all of them were forced to kneel. Morgath himself fought it, his ancient body trembling with the effort. But even he was forced down onto one knee, snarling in impotent rage. Only one wolf remained standing, Dante. He stood his ground not out of defiance, but because the mate bond protected him from her command, marking him as her equal, her other half. He looked at her, his heart filled with a love and awe so profound it was almost painful. "This ends now," Aria declared, her voice resonating with power. She walked toward Morgath, her steps silent and sure. "You sought to rule through fear and blood, but that is the way of tyrants, not leaders. Your reign of shadow is over." She placed her hand on his forehead. He flinched, expecting a death blow. Instead, a wave of silver energy flowed from her hand, not destroying him, but severing his connection to the dark magic he wielded. It stripped him of his unnatural strength, leaving him as nothing more than a bitter, old wolf. "Death would be a mercy," she said, her voice cold, "and you do not deserve it. You will be imprisoned in the deepest cells of the Northern Vale, where you will live out your days and reflect on your failures." With her power, she lifted him effortlessly and cast him toward Vincent's guards, who quickly shackled him in silver. The immense expenditure of energy had taken its toll. The crown of light flickered and vanished. The ethereal robes faded back into her simple dress. She swayed on her feet, the world tilting precariously. Dante was at her side in an instant, sweeping her up into his arms before she could fall. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He held her close, burying his face in her hair. "I've always got you." Aria relaxed against his chest, her eyes closing in exhaustion. She had faced her mother's killer. She had reclaimed her power. She had survived. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely safe. Aria awoke in a familiar room in the Northern Vale fortress. Dante was asleep in a chair by her bed, his hand gripping hers even in his sleep. She gently squeezed his fingers, and his eyes snapped open, instantly alert. The relief that flooded his face when he saw her awake was so profound it made her heart ache. Her first thought was of Serafina. "Is she?" "She's alive," Dante said, his voice grim, barely. "Morgath's blow was powerful. My medics are doing what they can." "Take me to her," Aria commanded, her voice still weak but firm. She found Serafina in the medical wing, pale and broken. When Serafina saw her, her eyes filled with tears of shame. "Why," Serafina whispered, her voice a pained rasp, "after what I did to you, you should let me die." Aria sat on the edge of the bed and took Serafina's hand. She closed her eyes, and a soft silver light emanated from her palms. She poured her energy into Serafina, healing the internal injuries, mending the broken bones. It was draining, but she didn't stop until the worst of the damage was repaired. Serafina stared at her, mystified. "But why?" "Because you sacrificed yourself to save me," Aria said simply. "Because you showed me that even in the darkest hearts, there is a capacity for good. We all deserve a second chance. Serafina." Later, a disgraced Kieran was brought before her. He fell to his knees, not by her power, but by the crushing weight of his own guilt. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. His voice choked. "I was a fool, a coward. I betrayed you. I betrayed my pack. I betrayed myself." Aria looked down at the man who had caused her so much pain. She felt no hatred. She felt no love. All she felt was a quiet, sad pity. "I forgive you, Kieran," she said. And the words were true. "But I will never forget. You are not fit to be an alpha. You will step down. Your pack will now fall under my protection as part of a new alliance." To her surprise, Kieran nodded in agreement. "I accept. It is more than I deserve." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The news of Morgath's defeat and the Queen's ascension spread. Aria made her first official decree. Seraphina's lover, the Beta warrior, was to be freed and all charges against him dropped. Seraphina was free to leave her family and her pack, to find a new life with the man she truly loved. Silver Crest was the first pack to officially join her new coalition. Aria's actions, her power, her mercy, her wisdom had spoken louder than any declaration of war. She wasn't a conqueror, she was a unifier, and the world of the werewolves was beginning to take notice. The time for hiding was over. Aria, with the counsel of Vincent and the unwavering support of Dante, sent out an official summons. Every alpha of every recognized pack was called to a great summit at the Northern Vale. The purpose was clear: to announce her return and to propose a unified kingdom under one throne, ending centuries of infighting and territorial disputes. The great hall of the ice castle was filled to capacity with the most powerful werewolves on the continent. Some, like the alphas of smaller packs who had long suffered under the tyranny of their larger neighbors, looked at Aria with hope in their eyes. Others watched her with suspicion, their arms crossed, their expressions hard. They were not accustomed to taking orders, especially not from a young woman who had been a servant only weeks before. One, in particular, was openly hostile. Alpha Ragnar of the Northern Frost Pack, a giant of a man with a wild, braided beard and eyes like chips of flint, stood up, his voice booming through the hall. "We have survived for 200 years without a monarch." "Girl," he challenged, his tone dripping with disrespect. "We govern ourselves. Why should we bow to you because of a bloodline, because of a light show? Blood can be faked. Magic can be an illusion. If you want our loyalty, you must earn it. Prove to us you are more than just a name. Prove you have the strength of a true leader." A murmur of agreement went through the more skeptical alphas. Dante stepped forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest, ready to put the disrespectful alpha in his place, but Aria placed a calm hand on his arm, stopping him. She met Ragnar's challenging gaze without flinching. "You are right, Alpha Ragnar," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority that silenced the room. "Loyalty is earned, not demanded. You ask for proof of my strength." She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of every alpha there. "Then I will give it to you. I, Aria Winters of the royal bloodline, accept your challenge. I will face you in the arena of combat. No titles, no magic, just wolf against wolf. If I win, you will bend the knee if you win." She paused. "Then this summit is over, and you may all return to your petty wars." A collective gasp went through the hall. To challenge a seasoned, battle-hardened alpha like Ragnar to single combat was suicide. Vincent started to object, but Aria gave him a look that said this was non-negotiable. Ragnar let out a booming laugh. "You have courage. Girl, I'll give you that. Very well, I accept your terms. Prepare to be crushed." Dante leaned close to her, his voice a worried whisper. "Aria, you don't have to do this. He's a brute. He will kill you." "No, he won't," she said, her eyes gleaming with a confidence he had never seen before. "He thinks he's fighting a princess. He's about to find out he's fighting a queen. You have to trust me, Dante." He looked into her stormy eyes and saw not fear, but fire. He nodded slowly. "Always." The ancient combat arena of the Northern Vale was a vast circle of packed earth, surrounded by tiers of stone seats carved into the mountainside. Thousands of wolves had gathered to witness the impossible duel. The air was electric with tension. Ragnar stood in the center of the arena, stripped to the waist, his massive, scarred body a testament to 100 battles. He was a mountain of muscle and raw power. When Aria entered, clad in simple leather training gear, a collective murmur of pity went through the crowd. She looked like a sapling next to an ancient oak. They faced each other. The rules were simple. The fight ended with submission or unconsciousness. The moment the signal was given, Ragnar charged, his roar shaking the very ground. Aria didn't meet his charge head-on, as Dante had taught her. She used her smaller size and greater speed to her advantage. She sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him past her, and landed a sharp kick to the back of his knee. It was like kicking a stone wall. He barely flinched. He spun around, his massive arms swinging, and she had to dive and roll to avoid being decapitated. The fight continued in this vein. Ragnar was all brute force, his blows powerful enough to shatter bone. Aria was a blur of motion, dodging, weaving, landing quick, precise strikes that were meant to wear him down. The crowd was on the edge of their seats. The girl was surviving. She was holding her own. But she was tiring. A powerful blow finally caught her hiapaisar, sending her flying across the arena. She landed hard. The air knocked from her lungs, her vision spotting with black. Ragnar loomed over her, a triumphant, cruel smile on his face. "It's over. Girl," he growled. "Submit." Lying on the ground, tasting blood and dust, Aria looked past Ragnar and saw Dante in the stands. He was tense, ready to leap into the arena at a moment's notice, but his eyes held a desperate, unwavering trust. "Trust me." That trust was the spark she needed. She closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in concentration. She shut out the crowd, the pain, everything. She reached deep inside, not for the overwhelming magic of the queen, but for the primal instinct of the wolf. Feel what Lyra is telling you. Ragnar reached down to grab her in that split second. Her eyes snapped open. She didn't just see him with her human eyes. She saw him with Lyra's senses. She saw the slight shift in his weight, the overextension of his arm, the momentary vulnerability. In a flash of pure instinct, she moved. She twisted, wrapping her legs around his outstretched arm, using his own strength to pull him off balance as the giant stumbled. She released his arm and drove her elbow into a pressure point at the side of his neck. It was a move Dante had shown her a dozen times in training, a move designed to incapacitate a larger opponent. Ragnar's eyes went wide with shock. A numbing sensation spread through his body. His legs gave out, and the mountain of a man crashed to the ground, unconscious before he even hit the dirt. Silence, a stunned, absolute silence fell over the arena. Aria staggered to her feet, breathing heavily, her body screaming in protest. She had won. She walked over to Ragnar's unconscious form. She could have put her foot on his chest, a sign of dominance. She could have gloated. Instead, when he began to stir a moment later, she did something no one expected. She extended her hand to him. He stared at her hand, then up at her face, his eyes full of a dawning respect. He took her hand, and she helped the massive Alpha to his feet. "I don't want subjects who kneel because they are forced to," she said, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "I want allies who stand beside me. I don't want your fear. I want your loyalty. I want your strength added to ours, so we can build a better world for our children." Ragnar looked at her, at this young woman who had bested him not with overwhelming power, but with skill, heart, and wisdom. He dropped to one knee, and this time, it was not forced. It was a choice. "My axe and my pack are yours. My queen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. His declaration broke the spell, one by one. The other alphas in the stands rose and knelt. A single voice began to chant her name, then another and another, until the entire arena was thundering with it. Aria, Aria, Queen Aria. She had earned it. In the weeks that followed her victory, Aria worked tirelessly. She formally established the new Alpha Council, a governing body where every pack, no matter how small, had a voice. Dante, with his strategic mind and unwavering loyalty, was the clear choice to be its head, acting as her right hand and the commander of their newly unified military forces. Her first act as queen was to abolish the archaic laws that had oppressed omegas and betas for centuries. Service was no longer indentured servitude. Mating choices were to be respected, not dictated by status. Education and opportunities were to be available to all, not just the children of high-ranking wolves. It was a revolution. There was resistance from some of the more traditionalist factions, but with alphas like Ragnar and Vincent vocally supporting her, and with the quiet, deadly threat of Dante's Crimson Shadow warriors ensuring order, the transition was smoother than anyone had anticipated. She proved to be a natural leader. She listened more than she spoke, her ability to sense the emotions of others giving her an uncanny insight into their true needs and desires. She was fair, compassionate, but also firm. When two packs brought a century-old land dispute before her, she didn't just make a ruling, she walked the disputed border with them, proposed a compromise that benefited both sides, and stayed until the two rival alphas shook hands. Dante watched her, his heart swelling with pride. This was the woman he loved, not just the beautiful, vulnerable girl he had rescued, but this strong, wise, and capable queen who was healing their fractured world. He was her sworn shield, her commander, her mate, but more than anything, he was her most devoted subject. With the new political structure taking shape, Aria turned her attention to establishing her royal court. She began the ambitious project of restoring the ancient royal castle, which lay in ruins on a mountain overlooking the capital, a sad relic of her family's past. Wolves from every pack volunteered their time and skills, a symbol of their newfound unity. Ethan, now fully recovered and thriving, was a constant, bright presence. He was formally recognized as the crown prince. He had his mother's kind heart and, as was becoming increasingly apparent, his father's sharp mind and protective instincts. He took his new role seriously, following Vincent around and asking endless questions about royal history. Mara, Dante's cousin, came to Aria one day. Her head bowed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a shamefaced humility. "Your Majesty," she began, unable to meet Aria's eyes. "I acted out of jealousy and ignorance. What I did was unforgivable. I am prepared to accept any punishment." Aria looked at the woman who had tried to have her attacked. She could banish her. She could imprison her. But that was not her way. Your punishment. "Mara," Aria said, her tone gentle but firm, "is to lead the new Royal Medical Corps. You will use your skills and your high birth to ensure that every wolf in this kingdom, from the highest alpha to the lowest omega, receives the care they need. You will atone for your crime by dedicating your life to service." Mara looked up, her eyes wide with stunned gratitude. She had expected retribution, not responsibility. In that moment, Aria did not just gain a skilled medic. She gained a fiercely loyal and devoted friend. Mara would go on to become one of her most trusted advisors. As the last stones of the restored royal castle were put into place, a sense of peace began to settle over the land. The packs were working together, trade was flourishing, and for the first time in centuries, there was hope. Aria and Dante decided it was time. They announced their official mating ceremony, a grand celebration to coincide with the castle's inauguration. It was to be a symbol of the new era, a union of ancient royalty and modern strength. Invitations were sent, preparations were made, a feeling of joy and anticipation filled the air. But on the eastern borders of their new kingdom, in the blighted lands where rogue packs and outcasts roamed, a new threat was stirring. Scouts brought back disturbing reports of a massive rogue army gathering, led by a charismatic and brutal alpha named Fenris. They were not just raiding, they were conquering, absorbing smaller rogue packs into their forces with chilling efficiency. One evening, alone, half-dead Scout crawled to the gates of the easternmost pack territory. He carried a message, A piece of wood with a single name burned into it. Aria. And below it, a symbol, a broken crown. The joy of the upcoming ceremony was shattered, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a new war. The peace they had fought so hard to build was about to be tested. The news from the eastern border cast a dark pall over the kingdom. Fenris was a name whispered in legends, a ghost story used to frighten pups. He was an alpha of Queen Selene's era, a brilliant but ruthless warrior who had been exiled for his extreme brutality and his dabbling in forbidden magic. No one had heard from him in 25 years. They had assumed he was dead. Now he was back, and he had an army. His message was delivered to the royal court by a terrified border patrol alpha. It was not a declaration of war, but a personal vendetta. Tell Aria Winters, the daughter of the woman who stole my life, that I am coming. The message read, I am coming to reclaim what is mine, the throne, the power, and the life she and her mother took from me. I will burn her new kingdom to the ground and dance in its ashes. The threat was chilling enough, but the scouts' reports were even more terrifying. Fenris's army did not just consist of wolves. They were flanked by strange, shadowy creatures, beasts summoned by dark magic. His warriors fought with a fanaticism that was unnatural, their eyes glowing with a malevolent energy. He is using blood magic, Vincent said, his face pale and grim, an ancient, forbidden art that draws power from sacrifice and pain. It corrupts everything it touches. Aria felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was not a simple territorial dispute. This was a war against an evil she had only read about in history books. Her mother had faced this darkness and won. Now it was her turn. Postpone the ceremony, she said, her voice quiet but firm. All thoughts of wedding dresses and celebrations gone. Summon the Alpha Council. Tell them to prepare their warriors. We are going to war. Dante stood beside her, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes was a promise. He would stand between her and any darkness. Until his last breath, the kingdom they had just begun to build was about to face its first, and perhaps its final trial. The call to arms went out across the kingdom in a show of unity that would have been unthinkable just months before. Warriors from every pack began to assemble at the capital. The Northern Frost Berserkers stood shoulder to shoulder with the swift Silver Crest Scouts, all under the command of Dante Blackthorn. The age of pack rivalry was over. They were now one army, with one queen. Dante was in his element. He drilled the soldiers relentlessly, forging them into a cohesive fighting force. He devised strategies, studied maps of the eastern territories, and planned for every contingency. His cold, calculating mind, once a tool for pack domination, was now the kingdom's greatest military asset. Meanwhile, Vincent took Aria to the royal library, a hidden chamber beneath the castle filled with the collected knowledge of her ancestors. Your healing light is a powerful weapon against his darkness, Vincent explained, pointing to ancient texts. But you cannot just heal. You must learn to wield the light as a shield. As a blade, you must learn the battle magic of the queens. Aria trained day and night, learning to project shields of silver energy, to focus her light into searing beams that could purify corrupted ground, and to connect telepathically with her commanders on the battlefield. The power took a heavy toll, leaving her exhausted, but she pushed on, driven by the thought of what would happen to her people, to Ethan, if she failed. Dr. Callum became Aria's most crucial advisor on the nature of Fenris's magic. As a member of the ancient order of scholars, he had access to forbidden lore. Blood magic preys on life, he explained, his face grim. It creates decay, sickness, and despair. Only the pure life force of the royal bloodline, the silver light, can counteract it. You are their only hope. Your Majesty. Aria felt the immense weight of that statement, but she soon discovered she was not the only one who could wield the light. One afternoon, while she was practicing creating a protective shield, Ethan wandered into the training room. He tripped and scraped his knee. As Aria rushed to his side, Ethan, crying more from surprise than pain, placed his own small hand over the scrape. A faint, but unmistakable, glimmer of silver light shone from his palm. The scrape healed instantly. Aria and Dante stared, speechless. Ethan, a child of both the royal line and a powerful alpha line, possessed a power that was a unique fusion of both. His potential was staggering. He must be protected at all costs, Dante said, his voice tight with a mixture of pride and fear. Ethan was their future, the continuation of the line, and a prime target for Fenris. It was decided that during the battle, Ethan would remain in the deepest, most protected part of the castle, with Vincent himself as his personal guard. As the war effort ramped up, unlikely heroes emerged. Seraphina, who had been living a quiet life with her beta mate, came before the queen. "Let me help," she pleaded. "I know how to be deceitful. I know how to play a part. No one would ever suspect me of being loyal to you. Let me go to the east. Let me pretend to join Fenris's army. I can be your spy." It was a dangerous, almost suicidal mission, but Aria saw the steel in Seraphina's eyes, the burning need to atone. She agreed. Kieran, now a humble beta commander, also proved his worth. Stripped of his arrogance, his natural talent for leadership shone through. He volunteered to lead a small, elite squad of scouts on reconnaissance missions deep into enemy territory, bringing back vital information about Fenris's army size and movements. Mara, in her role as head of the medical corps, worked miracles, organizing field hospitals, training healers, and ensuring every warrior would have the best possible care. The court that Aria had built on forgiveness and second chances was now the backbone of her kingdom's defense. The night before the army was set to march, the castle was quiet, thick with a heavy, unspoken tension. Aria found Dante on the ramparts, staring east into the darkness. "We should have been getting married tomorrow," she said softly. "Coming to stand beside him?" He turned, his crimson eyes full of a love so fierce it took her breath away. "We still can be." He took her hand and led her not to a grand hall, but to a small, ancient chapel within the castle, lit only by 100 flickering candles. There, with no guests and no fanfare. They completed the final part of the mating ritual. They stood before a simple stone altar and spoke their vows, words that came not from a script, but from the deepest parts of their souls. "You are the light in my darkness," Dante said, his voice thick with emotion as he gently bit her shoulder, renewing his mark. "My mate, my queen, my destiny. If I fall tomorrow, I will find you in the next life, and the life after that. I will always find you. You are the strength when I am weak." Aria whispered, her own tears falling as she marked him in return. "My alpha, my king, my heart. We face this together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." A profound sense of peace settled over them. They were no longer just Aria and Dante. They were a single soul in two bodies, bound for eternity. The fear of the coming battle did not vanish, but it was now overshadowed by a love that felt stronger than any army, more powerful than any dark magic. They were ready. The two armies met on the Crimson Plains, a vast, barren expanse that marked the border of the eastern lands. Aria's unified army, 5,000 strong, stood in disciplined ranks, their pack banners snapping in the wind across the plain. Fenris's horde of 7,000 rogues and shadowy beasts was a chaotic, snarling mass, a tide of darkness ready to crash upon them. The battle began with a roar that shook the heavens. Dante was a whirlwind of death and fury on the front lines, his wolf form a blur of black, tearing through the enemy ranks. at his side. Ragnar's massive white wolf was a battering ram, shattering enemy formations. Kieran and his scouts harried the flanks, their hit-and-run tactics causing chaos and confusion. Aria stood on a hill at the center of her army, a beacon of silver light. She did not fight directly, but her power was everywhere. She erected massive shields to block enemy volleys, sent waves of healing energy over her own wounded soldiers, and used her telepathic connection to coordinate the movements of her commanders with perfect precision. The battle bred a brutal, bloody stalemate for every rogue they cut down. One of the shadow creatures seemed to rise from the ground to take its place. The dark magic was taking its toll, sapping the strength and morale of her warriors. Back at the castle, Ethan could feel the battle through his mother. He felt her fear, her exhaustion, her desperate struggle. He could feel his father fighting, a burning ember of rage and love. The feeling was overwhelming. He couldn't just sit there. Evading his guards with a cleverness that was all Dante, Ethan slipped out of the protected chambers and made his way to the highest tower of the castle, which overlooked the distant plains. On the battlefield, Aria was faltering. A wave of dark energy, cast by one of Fenris's sorcerers, slammed into her shield, cracking it. She cried out as the feedback sent a jolt of pain through her. She was in danger. From his vantage point in the tower, Ethan saw the flash of darkness and felt his mother's pain as if it were his own. A terrified, furious scream tore from his small throat, and with it, his own power, the pure, untainted power of a royal prince erupted. A beam of brilliant, concentrated silver light, a perfect fusion of Aria's healing magic and Dante's raw power, shot from the castle tower across the miles and slammed into the battlefield. It didn't strike the enemy. Instead, it struck Aria's faltering shield. The shield didn't just repair, it expanded, exploding outwards in a massive nova of silver light. The wave of pure energy washed over the battlefield. It didn't harm Aria's soldiers, but it was devastating to Fenris's army. The shadow creatures dissolved into smoke. The rogue wolves howled in pain as the dark magic controlling them was purged, many of them dropping their weapons and fleeing in terror. The tide had turned. The enemy was in disarray. But the true battle was just beginning. Fenris himself had yet to appear. From the heart of his retreating army, a figure emerged, walking calmly through the chaos. Fenris. He was no longer fully a wolf. The blood magic had twisted him into a monstrous hybrid, half wolf, half demon, with skin like cracked obsidian and eyes that burned with black fire. The power radiating from him was immense, a vortex of pain and hatred. He ignored the lesser soldiers, his burning gaze fixed only on Aria. Several alphas, including Ragnar, charged him. He dispatched them with contemptuous ease, sending them flying with waves of dark energy. Dante launched himself at Fenris, a black thunderbolt of rage. Their battle was titanic, a clash of primal fury and dark sorcery. But Fenris was too strong. With a final, brutal blow, he slammed Dante to the ground, leaving him wounded and struggling to rise. Aria knew this was her fight, hers alone. She walked down from the hill to meet him on the blood-soaked plain. "You have your mother's eyes," Fenris rasped, his voice a chorus of pained whispers. "She looked at me with that same pity before she cast me out." "She cast you out because you were a monster," Aria said, her voice steady. A pained, almost human expression crossed his twisted features. "A monster. I was a monster because I loved her," he roared. "I loved her more than your father ever did. I would have burned the world for her, but she chose him, the noble Alpha, and she threw me away like trash." He lunged, and their final battle began. It was a duel of opposite silver light against black fire, healing against corruption, love against a hatred that had festered for decades. As they fought, Fenris's words echoed in her mind. Love, father. Something didn't add up. From the sidelines, where he was helping the wounded, Dr. Callum watched with dawning horror. He remembered the old texts, the secret histories of the royal line. Queen Celine's mate, Alpha Theron, had a younger brother, a brother who was also in love with the queen, a brother who was exiled for his violent jealousy. The truth hit him like a physical blow. "Aria," he screamed, his voice raw with urgency. "Listen to me. His family name is Stormchaser. He is Alpha Theron's brother. He is your uncle." The revelation struck Aria with the force of a lightning bolt. This monster, this creature of darkness and hate, was her own blood, her father's brother. She faltered, her attack wavering. Fenris seized the opportunity, lashing out with a whip of dark energy that wrapped around her, pulling her to her knees. He stood over her, his claws raised for the final, killing blow. She was trapped, facing an enemy she now knew was not just a villain from a history book, but a tragic figure from her own family, twisted beyond recognition by his own pain. How could she kill him? But how could she not? Staring up at the face of her uncle, twisted by dark magic, but still holding a flicker of the man he once was, Aria made a choice. She would not answer his hatred with more hatred. She would not answer his violence with more violence. She would answer it with the one thing he had never known: compassion. As his claws descended, she didn't raise a shield. She didn't try to dodge. She opened her arms and surged forward, wrapping them around his monstrous form in an embrace. "I am not my mother," she whispered against his corrupted flesh. "I cannot take away your pain, but I will not add to it. Uncle, let it go. Let me help you find peace." She unleashed her power, not as a weapon, but as a healing balm, a torrent of pure, unconditional silver light poured from her body into his. It was agony for him. The dark magic shrieked and fought against the light, but it could not win. Love, pure and selfless, was the one magic it could not defeat. The black fire in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by the blue-gray of a normal wolf's. The demonic features receded. The cracked, obsidian skin softened. The monster faded away, and in her arms was just a man, an old, tired wolf, his face wet with tears that burned clean paths down his grimy cheeks. "Celine," he whispered, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time, "you have her heart. Forgive me." His body went limp, his spirit, finally cleansed of the hatred that had consumed it. Finding its release, he did not die, but the dark power that had sustained him was gone, leaving him broken but pure. The battle was over. The rogue army, their dark leader defeated, threw down their weapons and surrendered. Aria, drained and shaking, stumbled back. Her eyes searched the battlefield and found Dante, wounded but alive, struggling to his feet. She ran to him. They met in the middle of the silent, carnage-strewn plain and collapsed into each other's arms. She poured what was left of her energy into healing his wounds. A small figure broke through the ranks of soldiers. It was Ethan, his face streaked with dirt and tears. He ran into their embrace, and for a long moment, the royal family simply held each other, a tiny island of light and love in the midst of the devastation. As the sun began to rise, casting its golden rays over the crimson plains, it signaled not just the end of a terrible battle, but the dawn of a new, hard-won era of peace. The aftermath of the Great War was a somber affair. The dead were honored in a massive ceremony, their pyres lighting up the night sky as a reminder of the price of peace. The wounded were tended to by Mara's medical corps, with Aria herself spending days on end in the field hospitals, using her healing abilities until she was on the verge of collapse, refusing to rest while her people suffered. Dante, now healed, was by her side constantly, a quiet pillar of support, forcing her to eat and sleep, guarding her moments of rest with the ferocity of a dragon. She held councils for the captured rogues, showing them not retribution, but mercy. Those who had been conscripted or controlled by Fenris's magic were offered a place in the new kingdom, a chance to work and live in peace. The kingdom was not just for the powerful packs, she declared, but for all wolves who wished to live under the light. Her mercy won her more loyalty than any conquest ever could have. Fenris, now lucid but frail, was brought before the queen's court. He expected execution. Instead, Aria pardoned him, on one condition: that he would spend the rest of his days in the royal library, under the tutelage of Dr. Callum, using his knowledge of dark magic to help devise defenses against it, ensuring such a threat could never rise again. It was a sentence of redemption, not punishment. Serafina returned from her espionage mission, hailed as a hero. She respectfully declined a position at court, choosing instead a quiet life with her mate in a small village, finally free from the pressures of her ambitious family. Kieran, who had fought bravely and proven his worth as a commander, found a different kind of peace. He dedicated himself to training the next generation of warriors. His focus shifted from personal glory to the protection of the kingdom. He eventually found a new love, not with a high-ranking alpha, but with a kind-hearted beta healer, a love built on respect, not status. With peace finally secured, the reconstruction began. The kingdom flourished under Aria's wise rule. The Alpha Council, guided by her vision, established fair trade routes, a unified legal system, and a shared defense force. On the one-year anniversary of their victory, during the inauguration of the fully restored royal castle, Aria made a surprise announcement. "A queen is the heart of her people," she said, her voice ringing through the great hall. "But a heart needs a shield. A kingdom needs not only compassion, but also strength. Therefore, I name my mate, my alpha, Dante Blackthorn. As king beside me, we will rule together, two halves of a whole, for the betterment of all." A roar of approval shook the hall. Dante knelt before her, his head bowed, as she placed a simple, iron crown, a symbol of strength and duty, upon his head. He rose as king, his crimson eyes filled with an unwavering love and loyalty for the queen who had chosen him. With the kingdom stable, Dr. Callum and Vincent revealed the final, greatest secret of the royal bloodline to Aria and Dante. "Your role, Your Majesty," Dr. Callum explained, "was never just to unite the werewolf packs Mapamit. That was merely the first step. The true purpose of the Queen is to be a bridge, a guardian of the balance between our world and the human world." Vincent nodded grimly. "For centuries, we have lived in the shadows, a myth. But the human world is changing. Their technology grows more advanced. Their satellites see everything. Their scientists are beginning to suspect. They are on the verge of discovering our existence. The true test of her reign," they explained, "would not be fighting other wolves. It would be navigating the inevitable revelation of their species to humanity and deciding whether that contact would lead to peace or to a devastating new kind of war. Her journey was far from over. It was just beginning." The threat came sooner than they expected. On their northern border, a pack was brutally wiped out. The reports were chilling. The attackers used advanced technology drones, sonic cannons, and weapons that fired silver-laced projectiles. They were not werewolves. They were humans, an ancient, secret organization known as the Hunters, led by a grizzled, ruthless veteran named Marcus Steele. His life's mission, a vendetta born from a tragedy in his past, was to exterminate every last beast on the planet. For years, they had hunted scattered rogues, but now, with the werewolf population unified and more visible, they had found a much larger target. The hunters' attacks were surgical and cruel. They targeted not warriors, but families, civilians, the soft underbelly of the kingdom. They set sophisticated traps, captured wolves for horrific experiments, and used their media connections to spread fear and misinformation in the human world about monster sightings. Dante and the War Council advocated for a swift, brutal retaliation. We must meet force with force, Dante argued. Show them that we are not animals to be hunted. We must instill fear in them before they can organize a larger offensive. But Aria refused. If we answer their brutality with our own, we become the very monsters they claim we are. We prove them right. There must be another way. Aria made a decision that shocked her entire council. She would not send an army. She would send a message. She used her resources to find a way to contact Marcus Steele directly. She proposed a meeting, on neutral ground, under a flag of truce. It's suicide, Dante argued, his voice full of fear for her safety. He will kill you on sight. If I go with an army, he will see a threat, Aria countered. If I go alone, he may see a leader. He is driven by hatred, but even the deepest hatred has a source. I need to understand that source. I need him to see me not as a beast, but as a person. Reluctantly, Dante